We are awesome, Courtney. It's a bye week, but we wanted to ask you the status of one Ryan Bates because trade deadline November 5. Maybe there's somebody out there, I don't know, the Colts who just lost a guard for the season that says, we'll take Nate Davis, give him a fresh start. Is Ryan Bates close?
It sounds like he's getting there because we know this shoulder injury is one that he was dealing with back in Buffalo. It's not something that's going to go away, but it's a pain tolerance thing from my understanding. And what Ryan Poles said last week when he was giving us those injury updates on, Larry Borum's close, Ryan Bates is in that same group. I wouldn't be surprised to see that window get activated coming off of the bye week, so going into the Washington game. But, Nate, we're talking trade deadline candidates. I feel like the next couple of weeks, Nate Davis's name should probably come up or at least be in the conversation. Bayless Jones. I've gotten that question on Khalil Herbert. I don't know truly if they'd be willing to part with running back depth right now, but the first two names, the one that you mentioned too, just seems like the obvious one considering they're not getting any production from somebody that was a healthy scratch last week.
Yeah, Courtney, let's go into that a little bit because some have said, and I know you've read this and heard this before, this whole thing of, the Bears have so much momentum. Why the bye week now? And Kap and I have felt this is the right time. They had 4 preseason games plus what we've had in the regular season. It's a great time to evaluate your team and get healthy. So, you mentioned the offensive line. Is there several other positions that the Bears really should consider at the deadline just to bolster the roster for the long haul?
So if you look back at the last 2 years, what did they do? Like in 2022, they went after a serious need. They said they could not evaluate Justin Fields with the group of receivers around him because the cupboard was so bare. So they took a shot and they went after Chase Claypool. It obviously didn't work out, but that was the logic there. And then same thing last year with Montez Sweat, an obvious need on the defensive line. I don't know if I see it as much right now as oh my God, they absolutely have to address this position at the trade deadline or they're not going to be able to reach their goals this year, which would be to, be one of the last teams into the playoffs. With how competitive the NFC North is right now, it's going to be hard regardless. But I know people bring up the offensive line and say, well, Poles has to be active and try to shore up, the interior, or whichever position, name a position. Good teams don't typically get rid of offensive linemen. So I don't really know who at the deadline would be sellers for that wouldn't be better than what you have. And knowing that you do get Larry Borum back soon, on the horizon is Ryan Bates too. I don't know if that's the asking price may be too much. And on top of that, I don't know who's going to be available that would be as big of an upgrade over who you already have on your roster, because the teams that are contenders don't get rid of good offensive linemen. And I just don't know if that's that realistic of a possibility on November 5th.
Would they pay the price, Courtney, in your opinion, if the phone rang and it was Tom Telesco of the Las Vegas Raiders and he said, Ryan, what do you want to give me? I'll give you Max Crosby.
Whew. I mean, of course you listen to the conversation first and foremost, but think about it from a Kap perspective and what their priorities are going to be this offseason. They have to bringing it back to the offensive line. They've got to add, whether it's in the draft, whether it's in free agency, it should be both. The thought of them carrying 2 really expensive defensive end contracts is not out of the realm of possibility by any stretch. But I find it kind of hard after the Raiders made their, they made their decision to part with Devontae Adams. That was a fractured relationship that was never going to be repaired between himself and Antonio Pierce. Books closed there. Do they really want to get rid of Max Crosby? Is that the smartest move for their front office right now? As they're in a place, it's a tipping point. This is a player that you drafted in the middle of the draft who has turned out to be a franchise star for you. If you gut the roster and get rid of him, then what are you doing? I don't think from a Raiders perspective, of course, from a Bears perspective or any other team that needs a pass rusher, a star pass rusher like that. You take a look at the Detroit Lions. Yeah. You make that call, but I just don't think it's realistic from a Raiders standpoint for job security. I know that Telesco just got there, but my goodness, what is the message you're saying about the rest of your roster about the direction this franchise is headed if you get rid of your stars?
Kap and I talked about this the other day, just like all the tourism, so many things to do in Vegas. You want to be an attraction. Even though you're an NFL team, if you're just unplugging stars, you're not a destination.
Yeah, my whole point, though, is like I'm watching the baseball last night, and when Aaron Judge facing Class A, Aaron Judge hits a home run. Superstars, impact, winning. You can have all the depth pieces you want. You got to have superstars. So whether it is, Courtney, in my opinion, Max Crosby or Myles Garrett, or if there's somebody out there that you go, game changer, I'm willing to listen.
Yeah, and that's you've got to give them credit because that's the approach that they've taken at the trade deadline. They've been very active in not just thinking short-term needs, but the year ahead. That's why they went after Claypool, and that was a miss. But they looked at the wide receiver group in 2023's free agency and said there's nobody there that's worth, outbidding another team for. So they took a swing. Now, would they do it again with a star pass rusher that could potentially be on? I mean, Cleveland, I think, is more of a likely place to be willing to sell than Max Crosby and what's going on now with the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't, with them unloading Amari Cooper this week, could Myles Garrett be on the move? Possibly. I think that's more realistic, though, considering their cap situation with their mess of a quarterback situation, which has made their salary cap and everything else hell for them. That's probably more realistic, but I don't know. Guys, I feel like from the conversations I've had the last couple of months as to when Hassan Reddick was disgruntled and unhappy. Okay, how come the Bears aren't getting in on this? Well, he's on the other side of 30 and it's getting too expensive. I just don't know if they'd be willing to make that exception for somebody else, knowing that the price is probably going to be just as steep as it is for any of these pass rushers that could potentially be on the move.
Courtney, what do you think of the Minnesota-Detroit game this weekend?
I'm pumped. I mean, God, this is a great week for us to have a bye week. Think about how many good games are in that noon window. Mm-hmm. Packers and Houston are in there too, but it's a good spotlight for the division to be in right now. I wrote a story along with my NFC North colleagues yesterday just about the 17-5 start that the NFC North is on and whether this division could really be the first in the 7-team format to get 4 into the playoffs. If it's not the NFC North, it's no one else. And it's, everything is centered around that Detroit game, first week that they will be without Aiden Hutchinson to see how that defense responds. But also the Vikings are coming off a bye at 5-0. And this is a chance now when their schedule starts to get really difficult after it was already pretty difficult with 3 playoff teams in the first 6 weeks for them to, take a step further towards establishing some supremacy in the NFC North and see how real that Sam Darnold stretch has been. Can they continue it now coming out of the bye when their schedule gets more difficult? But I'm pumped for that game. I think that's going to be the best game of the weekend, and to see 2 teams beat up on each other in the NFC North long before the Bears play either of them is a good gauge for Chicago to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of opponents that they're not going to face now until the middle of November.
All right, last thing you got from me here. I keep looking for the 5th time in 6 weeks, they named Jaden Daniels the Pepsi Zero Sugar Rookie of the Week. Yet his numbers are not even close to Caleb Williams' numbers. And according to PFF, over the last 3 weeks, Caleb Williams is the number 1 rated quarterback in the National Football League. Yet, I'm texting Chris Canty while he's on set today, telling him, dude, you better get on the bandwagon now. Or you're going to look like a Johnny-come-lately. All these people around the league, Shannon Sharp and Michael Irvin. It drives me insane. Why I let it bother me, I don't know. Why is there this hate toward Caleb Williams, or at least this unwillingness to give him his credit and his flowers?
Do you think it's because he's a Coca-Cola guy that he's not getting the Pepsi award?
Maybe.
Just a thought, just throwing that out there, because his numbers have been really good.
Is he truly a Coca-Cola guy?
I don't know. These guys are athletes. They probably don't drink soda like the rest of us degenerates just trying to stay awake in these streets. But
hey,
I think a lot of it has to do, and you can't be blind to who they've played the last couple of weeks, but whoever is voting on those awards, I think those are not like media driven awards, like the Player of the Week one, and certainly NFC and AFC a week Player of the Week awards come from the league office. I think people want to see it be a little bit more to see if it's sustainable, because they did it against Jacksonville bad team. They did it against Carolina, bad team. The Rams are not a good defense right now because they're all banged up, and by and large, they're not a great team. But you can't deny the production that you're seeing. You can't deny what we've seen from Caleb Williams, the first number 1 overall pick to win his, 4 of his first 6 starts, the back-to-back 300-yard passing games, just how much the level of difficulty of what the Bears are making him do offensively. Some of that's not going to show up statistically, but there's like the best chance that he's going to have to show the hard work that he's put in learning an offense that I think most people will say is a little bit more difficult than what they're having Jaden Daniels do in Washington is next week when they go there and they're in that primetime window. The only reason that game got moved to 325 is because of the quarterback matchup. And it's a good measuring stick early on or, almost at the halfway point of the season to see the progress he's made in running his own race. Those are the words that Ryan Poles said he wants Caleb to kind of keep close as he's looking at himself and his progress he's made over these first 6 games to what Jaden Daniels has done. I think both have been tremendous, and it's okay to have like opinions on both being really good quarterbacks early on and not having to pit one over the other, but probably because of Washington's start. And yes, they just ran into maybe the best team in the AFC last week in the Baltimore Ravens. That might have him up, I guess, in other people's power rankings. But again, there's nothing you can take away from especially the 3-week stretch that Caleb Williams has had.